And let me share my screen.
Okay, I think you should have permissions.
It says you need to enable it.
I knew that was going to happen. Okay, you should be good.
There we go.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Oh, does everybody see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, should I get started?
Yes, ma'am. I think we are good to go.
Oh, 1 second. Present. Okay, hello everybody. I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about creative financing. And it's a small group, so this will be good if you guys have any questions, which you probably will. Feel free to come off mute, ask as I'm going along. Creative financing is one of those things that can get overwhelming very quickly. I always compare it to like the BIIRE strategy, where the first time you like hear about BIIRE, you're like, that doesn't quite click. But the second time, maybe the third time, it'll really start to click. So don't worry if you feel like things aren't making sense. It is a bit of a confusing topic, but I'm going to do my best to break it down and make it super easy for you. Before we start, actually, how many people here are realtors? I know Yasha is. Is anybody else in this group? Is it Valeska?
Yes, yep. Velasca would be the only other realtor.
Hey, yes, sorry, I just unmuted it. Hi, everybody. Let me show.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
You have a really pretty name. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So if you're a realtor, as Yasha and I have talked about, creative financing can either keep you from deals, or it can allow you to have access to more deals and get more deals done. So it's not just for investors, it is something for realtors to learn. And I hope you'll learn it and be able to do more for your clients, whether it's a buyer, a seller, and more for yourself if you're an investor and want to buy. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Eastern Iowa, and I'm still here. I started real estate investing about 2 years ago. We have a completely local portfolio. Everything is within 15 minutes driving. We have small multifamilies and single families, so nothing over fourplexes. And then we do, I believe I have 12 midterm rentals, a handful of long-term rentals, and a handful of rent-to-own rentals, which we will get into. And then I also am the co-founder of Women Invest in Real Estate. So I have this picture here. That was just a few weekends ago, and there's Yasha looking beautiful as ever. We had so much fun in Orlando, and we do retreats. We have an online community, podcast, all of that good stuff. And then this is my co-host, co-founder, Amelia. And then this picture is my life partner and business partner, as I like to call him, Brant. So we do all of our real estate together. And that is all about me. So we're going to dive into creative financing. And something that can be really confusing is there's a million different names that are floating around out there. Some of them you'll hear are sub-2, seller finance, wrap mortgage, rent to own, lease purchase, lease sandwich. All of these are basically terms that are under the umbrella of creative financing. So when you say creative financing, you're talking about any of these terms. That's like to compare, like saying Christianity and then, being Lutheran, Catholic, Methodist, whatever. So creative financing is the overarching term. A lot of people will use seller financing in place of creative financing, including myself, which is actually not correct. But if you hear somebody say seller financing, they might be referring to any of these other strategies as well. So why don't we talk about what the heck are these actual strategies? Oh, but before that, so the importance of creative financing is every time that you have, thrown a cash offer, or as a realtor presented a cash offer and it didn't go through, this could have been an opportunity where creative financing could have gotten the deal done, because creative financing is more than just the purchase price, whereas a cash offer is typically just a low ball purchase price to get the deal done quick. And a lot of people, that doesn't work. There's a lot of people out there who can't accept a low ball cash offer for one reason or another, which we will get into. So creative financing for me, it is a tool in my tool belt. It is not what I do primarily. I have probably done 5 to 10, probably 10 creative deals. And that's kind of my back burner strategy, where if it comes up, I'll use it and I'll use those strategies. But primarily, we actually love to do BRRRRs. We do a lot of big rehabs, and then like to refinance out of them to keep our money moving. And as investors, you just have to remember we're problem solvers. And the better you can solve problems, the more deals you're going to get done. And sellers have problems, buyers have problems, tenants have problems. However it is you can solve these, the better investor you're going to be. So first things first, and again, if you guys have questions, put it in the chat, unmute yourself, whatever, we can stop and we can talk. And no question, especially when it comes to creative financing, is stupid, because it can be a little bit to wrap your head around. So don't worry about that. So first thing is seller financing. Seller financing is technically when there is no debt on a property. So that means the seller owns it free and clear. There's no bank, there's no loans, there's no liens, nothing. And the seller essentially allows somebody to buy their home over time. So the terms that are going to be in every creative financing deal are purchase price, down payment, interest rate or monthly payment, and then the term length. And two documents that are going to be different than if you had a cash offer or were working with a bank are a mortgage and a promissory note. Just like you have a mortgage with your bank on your primary residence that says, hey, if you don't pay, we're going to foreclose on your house and you're going to lose it. A mortgage between you and the seller says, hey, buyer, if you don't pay the seller, they can foreclose on you. So it's the same exact thing. It's just between two people instead of between a bank and a buyer. And then additionally, you're going to have the promissory note that is basically a fancy IOU. So hopefully that should make sense. But just remember, seller financing means the property is debt-free. And I will have hard examples for you guys to look at later that will be able to make it a little more clear. Secondly, we have a wrap mortgage, and it is the same thing as seller financing. There just happens to be debt on the property. So whatever you're buying the property for has to wrap around the initial debt. Obviously, if somebody owes $100K on a house, they can't sell it for 80. They could, but they'd have to come up with 20K at the closing table. So they're probably going to sell for more than the initial debt. So this is the initial debt. This is the second piece of debt, the buyer who comes and wraps around that existing mortgage. So same idea, seller financing, there's just debt on the property, which means that monthly payment might consist of two pieces, which we'll get into with an example. And the additional documents for a wrap mortgage, you definitely want to have this mortgage and this promissory note. And then you're going to get the loan information and authorization from the seller so that you can access their loan information and, verify everything that's going on, make those payments, request payoff if you go to buy it or sell it, and all of that good stuff. And the reason you really want to have a mortgage when you are doing a wrap mortgage, so seller financing with debt, is that the seller needs to have this document so that if they ever go try to buy another house, they can show the bank that that debt is taken care of. If there's no mortgage to show the bank, then the seller might try to go get another house, and the bank will say, hey, I see you have $200K of debt on this property over here on Main Street. What's up with that? You don't have the DTI to get another house. If you have a proper mortgage in place, the seller can say, nope, here's my mortgage. I sold that debt. It's being covered. It's been paid. It's a wash. And the banker should be able to say, okay, got it. That does not count negatively towards your debt to income ratio. And if anybody doesn't know what debt to income is, it's basically a ratio that a banker will use to understand if you can qualify for more debt. For example, if you make 50K a year and you have 500K of debt, that math doesn't math, and a banker is not going to give you a loan. If you have 500K of income and 50K of debt, that's a completely different ratio, and the banker is going to be like, you're good to go. And there's some rules of thumb. I believe DTI needs to stay under, I think it's 33% for a mortgage, or maybe it's 28%. Yasha, do you have any idea?
It's typically on a conventional mortgage, it's 43%.
Oh, okay.
Back end and about 24% front end, which means the housing ratio.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
So yeah, what Rachel said, I did not have those numbers right, but it is like a rule of thumb for a banker to know, are you buying too much house for your income, or can you qualify for this loan? So definitely really important to understand. And again, you're gonna have your purchase price, down payment, interest rate, and term length. Now, another term you might hear is sub 2. If you've heard of Pace Morby, he's always talking about sub 2. The difference with sub 2 is that you are not making the mortgage. You are not creating a promissory note. So if that seller tries to go get another house, there's no documents that protect them in their DTI, which is obviously not good for the seller. And the seller will probably never know that they need to have these documents until they go try to get a house and they can't. So if you're going to buy creatively with debt, I always recommend to do a wrap mortgage, not sub 2, because the wrap mortgage has the mortgage and the promissory note, which protect your sellers. We're here to be ethical. We're here to help people, not screw people over. And it really might only be another $500 to get these documents written up, maybe a little bit of more time, and it's going to help both of you in the long run. The other thing with sub 2 is typically, so sub 2 means you're taking a house subject to the existing mortgage, and you typically buy at the debt that is there. So the seller just breaks even. So if they owe $98,000, you're just taking over the $98,000 loan and whatever that monthly payment is. You're not buying it for anything more than the existing debt. And typically these people might be, have a house that's in disrepair. They can't make their payments. They've moved and the house is empty and they just want to be done with it. So it's definitely distressed situations. Not everybody obviously wants to sell their house for what they owe on it. Whereas a wrap mortgage, there might be 98K of debt on it and you buy it for 120, 130, 200, whatever. So sub 2 is just the existing debt, no mortgage documents. And a wrap is any purchase price with mortgage documents. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. So another creative financing definition is rent to own. And I actually do rent to own on a few of my properties. Again, it is not my main strategy. I just use it when I have a opportunity that I think will work well for this, and maybe long-term rental or conventional financing won't work. So that's why I like to have these tools, because I can do deals that won't work with cash offers or regular tenants. So rent to own is typically when a landlord is seller financing a deal. It's just called rent to own for some reason when it's a landlord tenant situation. And you guys have probably heard of rent to own. It tends to have a really bad reputation. It tends to come off as very scammy and unethical, and it absolutely can be. And there are a ton of people who do it very unethically, just like everything in the world. And there are people who do it ethically and truly want to help people, which is what I try to do. So when it comes to rent to own, maybe you've decided that you want to sell or finance one of your houses to your tenant for whatever reason. Maybe you want to make more money. Maybe you don't want to take care of the repairs or the upgrades of the property. Maybe you just want to help them out, whatever it is. And you're going to have, just like any other seller finance deal, your purchase price, your down payment, your term length, and your monthly payment. I don't know why I don't have monthly payment right there, but there's a monthly payment, obviously. And then there are going to be a few extra documents that are going to help protect both you and the buyer, aka the tenant. So one of those is going to be an option agreement. You can do rent to own 100 different ways. You could structure it 100 different ways. The way that I structure rent to own is my tenants rent until they own the house. And the way they own it is they go get a mortgage to buy me out. So I don't sell it on contract to them. I keep the deed. And they are literally just renters until they have the opportunity to get a mortgage. How do you know when it's a good time to rent to own on a property? Great question. So 2 of the properties that I rent to own are properties that I don't want to have, are C-class properties that I would not typically want long-term rentals in, because C and D class areas, might be harder to rent, and you might get a lot of turnover because people don't stay for long and they may not be great areas of town. You got to go and do those walkthroughs. You got to go, or somebody on your team has to go and do those repairs. But with rent to own, you don't do any repairs. You don't do any maintenance. You don't have any vacancy, because they are acting like a buyer, even though they're just renting, because you have an option agreement. And the option agreement says you have X amount of years to buy me out at this price. And that is the piece that's different than a normal rental. So for me, I had an opportunity in 2 areas of town I don't like, but I know if I do rent to own right, I only ever have 1 tenant. I don't do the repairs, I don't do the maintenance, and there's no vacancy. So I'll buy in an area I don't necessarily love, because I shouldn't ever be there. I shouldn't ever be replacing the tenants. I truly want my tenants to win in their rent to own situation and be able to buy me out, because I bought in a neighborhood I don't like. I don't want to have tenant turnover. When you hear landlords that are unethical, it's because a lot of them will ask for a down payment. They'll give them a ridiculous term, like maybe 1 year or 6 months, to come up with the mortgage or the rest of the money to buy them out. And if they don't, or maybe they miss 1 rent payment, they kick them to the curb and they get a new tenant who does the same. And they keep all these down payments and they make a lot of money off of it. But it really screws over a lot of these tenants, because the reason they can't get a mortgage in the first place is maybe that they're not good with their money. So they don't have a good credit score. They're not good at budgeting and making payments on time, whatever these reasons are. So for me, my rent to own tenants, unfortunately, are late every single month. I have a late penalty, but I am not about to kick them out. I really want them to stay. I don't want to replace them. It is a lot of work to find a good rent to own tenant who you truly think is going to be able to buy you out at the end of the day. And I do a lot of screening to understand their financial situation, to know if they'll be able to buy me out. And I have had 2 of my rent to owns, I think, late every single month. I don't really mind. I would love it if they would pay rent on time, so that I don't have to worry about it. But they always pay their late fee, and they've never gotten more than 1 month behind. So I'm good with it. I'm not kicking anybody out over that. I just want to get paid at the end of the day, live my life. And I would love for them in a few years, whenever our option agreement says, to be able to qualify for a mortgage to buy me out. Does that make sense? That was a lot. If you have any questions.
I think we have a couple in the chat.
Oh, okay. Okay, what are the requirements? So I use a company called Screen the Tenant, and it's literally an ex-banker for the FHA, like an FHA banker, who went and created this program for rent-to-own tenants, specifically for landlords to be able to see, if my tenant does X, Y, and Z, how long will they have before they can qualify for a mortgage? So you put in, he goes and looks at their credit score, their income, all their debts, and I get like a 50-page report on everything. And he will tell you, I believe this tenant will be mortgage ready in 18 months or 36 months. And a piece of that program can also be credit repair. So like I said, a lot of tenants need to do rent to own because they have bad credit. The unfortunate assumption about rent to own is that it's for low income people. Unfortunately, it's not. It's for people who have non-consistent income, maybe contractors, 1099 employees, realtors, business owners who don't make a lot of money on paper, but do well for themselves, so they can't qualify for a bank. Maybe they make great money, but they're terrible with it, so they have bad credit. Maybe they've not been at their job long enough, so they can't qualify for a mortgage. It's those types of people. And so he will give you this giant packet that says, I would rent to them, yes, no, or maybe, and here's how long it should take them to get a mortgage. So I take that number, maybe it's 20 months or 36 months, and that's what I use in my option agreement. I say, hey, tenant, it looks like you will be mortgage ready if you keep doing all the right steps in 20 months. So in 20 months, your option agreement is up and you need to pay me out with a mortgage, or we renegotiate our contract. Maybe the purchase price increases, maybe the rent increases, maybe it goes down. And then I keep them there because, again, I'm not trying to place another rent to own tenant. It takes a long time. It takes months to find a good one. I want them to win. I want them to pay me out because that's when I make money. That's when they're the owners of the home. It's a win-win situation.
I have another question before you move on to the next one. So when you do the screening, are you basing the term length of based on like the report? Like if they're going to be rent ready in like 18 months, you're going to do it for 18 months. Okay.
Yep. And the reason is you could give a little bit of a leeway if you want. But they're probably going to take as long as whatever your agreement says. So if you give them 20 months versus 25 months, they're going to take the whole 25 months most of the time. So I like to do it shorter to keep people on top of it. I don't do less than 2 years because 2 years is really not enough time to get your credit to be changed significantly or to make more money or whatever it is. And then what I'll do is, let's say that I bought a house with seller financing and I have 10 years to pay this person back. I'll turn around and give my tenant 3 years so that if they don't make it, I can give them another 3 years. If they still don't make that, I still have 4 years left before my payment is due on my balloon payment. So I can keep working with them. But then if it comes down to 10 years, I might have to sell, I might have to refinance, I might have to just pay off my debt and keep working with them. Or maybe it's time that they just turn into a long-term renter and we don't even do rent to own anymore, or they need to find a new place. Okay, so what would happen if a tenant down the road decided to no longer rent to them? Or rent to own? Any penalties with them? Yes. So a rent to own tenant gives you a down payment. I like to get 10%. It typically ends up being closer to 5. And they rent with an option agreement. And then at the end of the day, they're supposed to buy you out. So if they don't buy you out, their non-refundable option deposit, aka down payment, is on the line. And the reason that you allow people to do their own repairs, their own maintenance, all of that good stuff is because they gave you a down payment, and that is basically your protection. So I have not had this happen yet, but my mentor, who I learned creative financing from, has probably done 30 rent to own tenants, and she's had a few just give up their down payment because they wanted to move across the country, change jobs, wanted to move back in with family, whatever. And they know it's non-refundable. And so some of them have willingly just let it go and wanted to go a different route in life. So that NROD agreement, that second bullet point under documents, that's non-refundable option deposit. That is the agreement that says you're putting this much money down, and you aren't getting it back. Here's what needs to happen for it to apply to your mortgage down the line. If this happens, we get to keep the deposit. So they're very aware that it is non-refundable. And if they make it to the end of the deal where they buy me out with a mortgage, that is a credit to their mortgage. It's basically their down payment to their new mortgage.
Do you usually keep that deposit in like a separate escrow account or with the title company, or do you just hold on to it in like a savings?
You get to keep it and spend it because your margin between what they're going to go buy you out at and what you owe is enough that you don't need to keep that money to apply to their purchase price. And my mentors made that mistake one time. They had too thin of a margin. So then when their buyer came to buy them out, they had to come up with a little bit of money to make that happen. So you just have to make sure that your margins are big enough that if I'm buying a house at 100, I'm selling it on rent to own for 130. So if they give me 13K down, you know, that's still $17,000 that they owe between what I owe and what they owe me. And that can get a little confusing. But if you just do the math, and you can, if you think it's going to be close, do the math, and you should be able to figure that out.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as like the contract that you use for like rent to own, like, do you create it yourself, or like do you have a help from like a real estate lawyer or something like that? Or where do you find a template for that contract?
I would definitely run it past your real estate lawyer. I have a rent to own contract that I use that I had from my mentors, but there's little pieces in it that maybe don't apply to the state of Iowa that do apply to the state they were using it in. Nothing major, but I would definitely, if you find a contract, just have your attorney at least check it over. Anything else? I see you have one other question. You said, what would happen if a tenant, oh, that was you. Yasha says, what are the requirements? How do you screen them? So some of my requirements off the bat, I try to get 10% down. If that doesn't happen, I like at least 5%. My other requirements, I don't have a ton of initial requirements besides the down payment, because when I screen the tenant to do it, they're the ones checking the mortgage. And so there's requirements that I guess I don't necessarily understand nor care about that they use to determine, hey, is this person going to be mortgage ready anytime soon? How many rent owns do you operate? I have 2. I had a third one I was going to do rent to own on, and I ended up doing midterm rental. So I only have 2. I've helped a few people. I've wholesaled a few rent to own opportunities. I'm not sure if that buyer ended up doing rent to own. But like I said, it is absolutely not my main thing. But if I find a deal that doesn't work in any other way, but it will work for rent to own, I'll do it. Do you try to get them pre-approved first to see where they stand? Chances are they've already tried, and that's why they're looking into rent to own. And most people are pretty aware, not most, some people are pretty aware of their credit and their income situation and know that they can't get approved. But I don't go through the pre-approval process because I'm assuming that they've already tried, because a bank loan is going to be cheaper. So they're going to try that first, and it's going to be less money down. You can get a bank loan for 3-5% down, whereas I'm trying to get 5 or 10% down. Oh, okay, yeah, answered that. And then Yasha says, call Jay Riley's office. Any other questions?
I have one other question. With the structure of the deal for the rent to own, are you also adding interest, or are you doing like just a flat payment monthly? Okay.
Yeah, so that's a really good question that I didn't answer on this slide, but I should. I do rent is rent. You don't ever get that back until you pay. When you pay me out, you obviously stop renting. You could do rent's 1,000, but 500 is a credit to the purchase price and 500 is rent. Or you could even structure it as a contract where there's interest. There's literally a million ways to do it, but I just try to keep it simple. Rent is rent until you pay me out and you get me out of the picture and you own the house. If they pay over rent, I'll give that as a credit to their down payment. So if rent's $1,000 and they pay me $1,100 every month, I'll give them $100 credit to their purchase price. And that's where you need to make sure there's a big enough margin where, because if they're paying down more than you're paying down on your loan, you might owe them some money when they go buy you out. So that's why you just got to make sure there's a big enough margin. And then also what I'll do is if they put less than 10% down, I'll try to have them pay over rent every month to build their down payment when they go to the bank. Because also I don't want to count on them to save money for a down payment. They're not. How about you pay it to me up front and that's your down payment, and we already know that's taken care of. So when you go to the bank, you already have paid $8,000 to this property. That's going to cover your down payment, taxes, insurance, and closing costs. I don't have to hope that you saved for it. Any other questions before I go to the next slide? And guys, I did not learn this overnight. This was me learning as I did a deal, asking tons of questions, figuring it out as I went, and learning from a mentor who made all the mistakes so that I didn't have to make as many. So now we're going to get into actual examples, which I think will be pretty helpful. So this is a wrap mortgage. It is a cute little house that I bought with no money down. What happened was the seller had bought this house only 9 months before, and she wanted to move in with her boyfriend. But she probably put 3% down on the property, was paying PMI, probably overpaid for the property in the first place. So she knew in the short 9 months, she didn't have enough equity, she didn't have enough appreciation or debt pay down to make money selling it with a realtor. She knew she'd probably be in the hole after a second set of closing costs, a second set of closing fees, or realtor fees. So she was interested in selling creatively. So what we decided, can't remember if I put this on the slide, I think she owed $98,000 on it. And if she would have sold it at the market for $105 minus realtor fees, that's not $98,000. That's less than $98,000. Might also including closing costs. So she wouldn't have made anything. So instead we decided I'll buy it. She really wanted to get the cost of her house plus the new fence she installed. So I was like, sure, we can do 105. It might be worth 105. It might be worth 100, but that's okay. Because I'm going to buy it creatively with no money down. I'm going to take over her 3% mortgage, and I am going to pay her equity at $150 every month for 5 years. And looking back, 5 years is definitely not enough time. I think for seller financing, try to negotiate more. This was like the first deal I ever did on creative financing. So I was just so excited to do a deal. I didn't do a good job negotiating the term. The longer the term you get, the more flexible you can be with your purchase price and all of that good stuff. So her mortgage payment was $575. So obviously I have to pay that. And if she owes $98,000 and I'm buying it for $105, that means she has $7,000 of equity. So the way I'm paying her that equity is in $150 installments every month. And we decided on the number 150 rather than an interest rate. So that means the 150 is 0% interest, because I'm just saying I'll give you $150 every single month, instead of you saying, well, I'll sell it at 98, my mortgage is 3%, but I'll sell it to you for 5%. So I make that 2% interest. That just gets really confusing. So we just talk whole numbers. I'll give you $150 a month. How's that sound? Great. I owe $575 a month. I don't even know what that exact interest rate. I think it's around 3%. But I don't really care, because what matters at the end of the day is the whole numbers. Can I cash flow paying $575 and $150 every month? And then no down payment. I paid all her closing costs, so that when she went to the closing table, obviously I didn't ask her to write a check for her closing costs. I cover that. So I tell her that's kind of like my down payment. I'm paying all your costs. You get to just walk away and start making $150 every month to do absolutely nothing. She was happy. I was happy. And I had a great tenant in here who was a single mom looking for a place to stay for just 6 months in between moves. And she loved it and her son loved it. So that made 3 wins 3 happy parties. So the way that I could have, this was the house that I was going to rent to own that I didn't end up doing rent to own because it was just so cute and I didn't want to sell it. Because rent to own at the end of the day is you selling your property. It is on the same side as flipping. Whereas if you stop buying properties to rent to own, you will run out as your tenants buy you out. You will not have passive income forever because they'll all be sold. So I'll do some rent to owns, but I really love long-term rentals that I want to have forever. So this one, because it was so cute, I was like, I'm going to do a midterm rental on this one. I actually rented it for, I think, $1,800 a month, not $1,400. And my payment was $725. Granted, I'm in Iowa, so I don't have Florida cash flow or appreciation, but in Iowa, that is a great investment, especially when the house was only hardly 6 figures in the first place. The other option was, so I bought it for $105. I could have said, I'll rent to own it for $125. I want $12,000 down and I want a rent of $1,200 a month. Or I could have put a long-term rental in there for $1,100 a month, which would have been my easiest option, but I would have made the least amount of money. So I kind of went in between. I put probably $3,500 worth of furniture in here, started paying for the utilities, the lawn care, the Wi-Fi, and put a midterm rental tenant in. Any questions? Okay. And so as you can see, the first thing I listed on this slide is the seller's needs, because that is what you have to start with creative financing, because creative financing exists to solve somebody's needs. It's not to get you a deal to make you money. It is primarily to help somebody sell who couldn't sell for cash or couldn't sell on the market. This gal is a great example of a beautiful and newly renovated little house. She couldn't sell with a realtor. She would have been out money. She couldn't sell for a low cash offer. She would have been out money. But she got to make money with my offer. So that was a great win-win. Okay, another example of seller finance. So there was no debt on this property. This couple inherited this house unexpectedly. It was filled to the brim with stuff from that person having lived there for 40 years. They had busy full-time jobs. They had kids. They knew nothing about real estate. They didn't even own their own house. They were renters. This was completely overwhelming to them. And the house needed work. They didn't have the time. They didn't have the money, the interest, the energy, none of it. They had a investor walk through the house and offer them, I think it was $34,000. And they were like, oh my God, that is nothing. Even in Iowa, that is a very cheap purchase price. So what I was able to do is I said, hey, I can double your price, but it's going to be a seller finance deal. I'll pay you $300 a month, no interest. That is a purely principal payment. I will pay your closing costs. I won't give you anything down, but I will pay all your closing costs, which will probably be maybe $2,000. And then you're going to make $300 passively for the next 10 years. $300 times 12 is $3,600 times 10 is $36,000. So at the end of the 10 years, I will have paid them $36,000, but I bought it for $70,000. That means at the end of that 10 years, I have to give them another $34,000. So I have a $34K balloon payment. I can either sell it, refinance it, rent to own it so that my buyer pays off that lump sum for me, or use my own cash to pay that off. So what I'm doing right here is installing my own rent to own tenant who's going to pay me out, and then I pay them out. Does that make sense? It's kind of like I wholesaled it, but I kept the deed. I bought it creatively from somebody with the deed, and then I sold it creatively, keeping the deed. So I have 3 parties, really: the initial seller, me, and then my future buyer, which is exactly like a wholesale deal, except for this is a really long wholesale deal, essentially, because I am holding the deed for maybe 10 years. So I have a rent to own tenant in here. It's a family. They were super excited to have their own place, super excited to fix it up and have a yard to mow and a garage to hang out in. It's 3 little boys who were just excited to have more space because this house was actually a decent sized house. Can't really tell in the picture, but it's 3 stories. And they had come from a really small house. So family of 5 was very excited to move here. They gave me $7,000 down to move in. Well, I just told you it only cost me $2,500 to get this property. I just paid the closing costs and then a few other things. So right off the bat, I have made $4,500 to basically do nothing. It did take me 3 months to find the rent to own tenant. So I guess I had $900 of payments to pay the seller while it was empty. But I started advertising it the moment I got it under contract, so that when I closed, I could hopefully close ASAP with my buyer. Didn't happen like that, but in a perfect world, it would have. They pay me $1,100 a month. And they did the whole screening process, and it popped out that they'd be mortgage ready in 2 years. So they have a option agreement with me that says in 2 years, they have the option to buy me out at 100 and I believe 13,000 is what I sold it for. So I bought it for 70 and I sold it at 113. The option where I would make the most money is if my tenants keep lapsing and keep renewing their contract with me, because I'm cash flowing really well. So the longer I hold it, the more money I make, and the more I pay it down and I raise their purchase price. Obviously, the best situation for my tenant is for them to close immediately. Go get a mortgage, get me out of the picture, pay me off so I can pay off the original seller and they can own it just with the bank. So it doesn't really matter to me. I would love to see this family buy this house based on the way they have made their payments to me late every month. I do not think that will be happening anytime soon. But when that 2 years comes up, I will be more than happy to renew that contract with them. I will probably increase the price a little bit because they did not hold up their end of the bargain. They had 2 years. They didn't make it, which is fine. I'll renew, but I do need to increase the purchase price to keep them motivated to buy me out someday. Because if I just keep the same rent and the same purchase price forever, why would they ever go get a mortgage? They're just going to ride that out, you know? So I have no idea what they've done with the place, but I sold it full of crap. All this stuff in there was in there when I sold it to him. Because I said, you can buy it at 113 with all this shit in it, or I'll clear it out and you can buy it at 125. For them, they're like, we'll clear it out and save 12 grand, no problem. So again, there's many ways to make a win-win situation. There's many ways to wheel and deal with creative financing. Any questions?
How did you, how are you like able to find those like great, you know, like investment properties or like the people, the leads and whatnot?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that works really well for me is I tell everybody I'll give them $1,000 if they tell me about a house that's for sale that I end up closing on. So this was a referral from somebody who knew me and said, hey, reach out to this couple. I know them. The last house was also, this house was also a referral. So I paid $1,000 to this girl's friend because this girl's friend said, hey, Grace, here's my friend Haley's number. You should text her. So I said, heck yeah. And I got the deal done. I paid that gal $1,000. Same for this house. So that definitely works better in a smaller market. I'm not going to pretend that it works the same in LA as it does small town Iowa. It's definitely different, but you can absolutely use that. And if you do, I talk about this later, but you have to do a shocking amount for the referral. It gets different if you're a realtor. I think we decided at our retreat that you can't really do that as a realtor, but maybe your spouse or a business partner could make the referral. But it has to be a number that's going to stop people in their tracks and call you, even if they haven't talked to you in 7 years or don't even know you, or have to message your mom to get your number to tell you. Like, you got to get these people motivated to tell you about any house they see.
Taylor, I don't know if you hear me, but do you know the laws for realtors in regards to this, like with referral fees? Because we do hold an active real estate license, or if we are active, are we able to do some sort of referral fee? Or does it have to all run through the brokerage or do like what Grace mentioned? I don't know if she hears me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question, but I would think that if you had like a LLC, you
Run
could
it.
probably do that on the side, maybe. I don't know.
That's what my thoughts are too.
I can talk to one of the attorneys at my office and find out if you're allowed to do a referral fee outside of the brokerage.
Okay. Okay. Thanks,
Can you
Taylor.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome, girl.
Yep. And I have no idea if this is helpful, but I don't know if it makes a difference between a gift card versus a straight check. I write a straight check, and I do 1099 them because they're gonna have to pay taxes on that, and I want to be able to write off that $1,000 fee. So I just make sure that they write a 1099 for me before I give them the check. I've paid this to a tenant. I've paid it to my plumber. I've paid it to friends, family. I'll pay it. I don't lie. If it's $1,000 to get me a great deal, that's going to make me tens of thousands, maybe more than that. In Iowa, you're getting lower prices. You're probably not making multiple figures on a deal, but I'll pay that.
I actually like that with the 1099. I didn't think of that because I mean, even if you did it, I don't want to say we're lying, but you know, even like if you hire someone, you're putting them on a 1099. So that might be the loophole.
Yeah, you could have hired them for, marketing, like
Yeah.
cold calling. You could, again, I'm not going to say how to do it or what you should and shouldn't do, but that could be something to think about if you're a realtor. Good question though. And I'm not a realtor, so I have never really had to answer that question. I have one more example for you. This is a very interesting one. So this is not my example. This is my mentor's. And this is an example of a lease sandwich. So getting even more creative. So there's this beautiful house and it had a historic grant on it of $40,000. And some grants, if you sell within a certain amount of time, you have to pay the grant back. This person really needed to sell, but they didn't want to have to pay that $40,000 grant back or the fee or whatever it was. So they needed to basically figure out how to stop losing money off this property, but keep the deed. So what my mentors tried to do, and this deal ultimately did not work out, but they have done deals like this, is they tried to lease from the owner with an option agreement that says, hey, in 2 years, when this grant expires, this payback period expires, we're going to buy your house. Then they turned around and leased to a rent to own tenant with a option agreement of maybe 5 years. So that within that window, they would get the deed and then be able to sell the deed by the time their rent to own was ready to purchase. And this would save everybody $40K in the historic grant that would need to be paid back if it was purchased within that 2-year time period. So no closing costs, that's the other great thing, but they don't control the deed. They are just a renter who is essentially subleasing to another renter with an option deposit. So it definitely gets a little bit more tricky. I wouldn't go around doing this all the time, but if you have a really great deal that you need to get around that lien, triggering that lien, it could be an idea. Yeah, this house is so beautiful. And that was another reason that they were willing to do the lease sandwich, because it was a turnkey house and they were going to buy into a massive amount of equity. So I believe what happened in this situation was they essentially gave a deposit to rent the house, basically a down payment of a few grand because the seller needed to move. And then they started leasing, and then they turned around and got a deposit and put in a leaser themselves. I believe what happened was this ended up being a duplex. They thought it was a single family. It ended up being a duplex with a crazy neighbor or something. And so they learned in this lesson, they just forfeited their initial deposit in their lease. which cost them a few $1,000s, but at the end of the day, it was initially worth the risk because they could have made a ton of money off of it if the deal had gone right. Now they do a lot more due diligence if they are going to do a lease sandwich. I believe they've done a few other ones, maybe shorter timelines, no deposit to the seller so that if anything happens, they're not out any money. But again, just an example of something you could do if you're able. Yeah, it's essentially a rental arbitrage, but they have a option agreement. It's literally a rental arbitrage with an option agreement that says we can buy the house. So yeah, so many creative things to do, and it can get overwhelming. But if you're willing to just sit and talk to the seller to figure something out with seller financing, because there are different terms that you can push and pull to suit your needs, you might be able to come up with a better agreement for everybody. Any questions? Okay. So at the end of the day, a lot of times, as you've seen, 2 of the 3 houses I showed you were really gorgeous houses. Only one of them was a fixer-upper. Creative financing actually tends to be more about distressed sellers, not necessarily distressed properties. When you're doing fix and flip and BRRRRs, you're really focused on that shitty property that needs a gut so that you can create that value add and force that equity. That's not necessarily the same case with creative financing. It could be, but a lot of times there are people who are distressed that need to sell a beautiful home creatively. Here's the list of, this is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some of the reasons why somebody might have a beautiful home and want to sell for no money down on creative financing. I'll let you guys look that over. If you're not looking, I guess I'll read some out loud. Maybe they can't afford realtor commissions, like I showed you in my first example. They need a flexible timeline. They need money up front. They don't want people seeing the inside of their home. They don't want the inside of their home online for the world to see. They don't want to deal with a realtor. Some people are weird about that and don't want to work on the market with a realtor. Maybe there's too many repairs they can't afford, don't have the energy, don't have the time. There's also massive tax benefits to selling on contract, selling creatively, especially if it's non-owner occupied. You get to stretch out that tax burden over many years instead of taking the whole lump sum in 1 year. Maybe they want a better purchase price, which you can absolutely give them a better purchase price, like I did with that blue house where I doubled that cash offer, but I got my terms. So a lot of people will say, I'll give you your price if I get my terms, or if you want your terms, I get my price. And again, because a bank loan is typically just about the purchase price, that's all people argue over. Whereas with creative financing, there's 4 different terms that you can mess around with to make a win-win situation. So it makes it a little easier to get to that situation that works for everybody. Maybe somebody wants to sell as is. They don't want to clean their home out. They don't want to remove all the junk. They don't want to be stressed at selling on a market. They just want to find one person and get the deal done. Maybe they're behind on their mortgage payments or they owe more than the house is worth. That's another example where you could buy creatively. Let's say somebody just bought their house in July for easy numbers, 100,000, but now it's only worth 95,000. They can't go sell that if they need to move or for whatever reason, but you'll buy it for $5,000 more than it's worth if you have 25 years at 3% to own this house. Maybe they're behind on taxes, they don't want inspections, they don't want contingency, literally a million different reasons.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Going back to the upside down on a mortgage part, like, what if there's an opportunity where like literally they would be breaking even or they still want a little bit more and then there's still rehab? Is that something like, you would take on, or like, what are your thoughts?
Good question. So rehab is tricky when it comes to seller finance. And as I was telling you before this started, I just had a sub 2 deal, but it needed rehab. Well, the whole point of seller finance is because you get to lock in a low rate for a long amount of time and hopefully give a low down payment. if something needs rehabbed, a lot of people want to refinance to get their money out. But if you're refinancing, there's no point in creatively financing unless it's very short term, because you're getting rid of that initial seller finance deal by refinancing. So one case that it would work is if you want to flip it and maybe you get it creatively for no money down and you only have a 1-year term, you fix it up and you sell it. Then you pay the buyer out and then you take what the difference is. But if it's something that's just going to be a long-term rental and you're going to have to put $50K into it, if you can't get that $50K back with a refinance and keep the initial terms with the seller finance. So you just have to think about what is the end, not only how are you going to get it, but what's the end goal? Does that make sense? So that's why I like the turnkey houses on creative financing, because I don't have to put any money into it and it's ready to rent.
Me too.
Yeah. Whereas the deal I had right now that I just had that came to me, I think I could have gotten it for well under market value and a great interest rate, but I would have had to put 40K into it. Well, I want that 40K back. I don't want it to sit there for 40 years, not 40, for 30 years until I pay off the loan. So I would have to refinance. Well, what's the point of refinancing if I could just buy it for cash and then do a BRRRR? Well, I couldn't buy it for cash because he owed too much on it. So that it wouldn't work in that situation.
Have you ever seen like situations where maybe someone takes on, like instead of doing, or maybe kind of going to your point with like a short-term creative finance option would be to like have the seller basically deed the property to you and then you basically fix it up and then sell it? Almost kind of like, I guess that would kind of go more so into fix and flip at that point then.
And I've even heard people who believe Invest with Sasha on Instagram. She partnered with the seller because they wanted more. So she said, I can't give you this price cash. I can give you that price if we partner 50-50. I'll do all the renovations and then we'll split what it sells for. Obviously, I get my renovation back. So they partnered on it. So she like bought into the deed with them, fixed it up, and then sold it. So that was definitely a creative solution.
Okay, I will definitely look at that too.
Obviously, there's a lot of risk there because they were also living in it. So what happens when she pays them money to get in on the deed? They don't ever move. So now she can't ever sell it. And they were taking a really long time to move out. Eventually they did, and they had a great deal and she made money off of it. But there's different risks there. Or what happens if she's ready to sell and they don't want to sign off on the paperwork? Now she spent all this money to rehab it and can't sell it.
I wonder if they could like put some things in place to basically, I don't want to say sign over the rights, but maybe do a real estate specific power of attorney to help with that.
Yeah, maybe.
That's good stuff.
Another example I have is we did a term. Like I said, I want to get at least 10 years on a term. I'll feel really good because I think the market could go down and back up in 10 years. 5 years is a little risky because in 5 years, the market might not be where I wanted it to be. It might be lower. So now my home is actually worth less. But I also am buying at a price that I already am buying into equity. So I'll be good with 5 years. I can sleep perfectly fine at night knowing I have a 5-year term. If I could do a couple of those deals over, I would have negotiated longer because the length could be one of the most important pieces of the deal. Because if somebody's going to give you 100 years to buy them out over, which no one's going to do that, but they could, you can pay double for the property. Because in 100 years, the property is going to be worth 3 times, 4 times, whatever. Obviously, I don't suggest doing that. But just to make an extreme example, so hopefully it clicks, that you can pay more if they give you a longer time. And then one example we did of that was we took over somebody's mortgage with a wrap. She didn't get any money until we sold it because we only did a 1-year term. She had like 10K of equity. So we took it over at maybe 50K. She owed 40. We only made her mortgage payments. Our plan was to put in a few $1,000s of paint, clean it up, and then sell it for maybe $100K. My partner ended up keeping it and just refinancing us out. So I was no longer on the deed, and then the original owner got her 10K of equity. But that could be another thing. If you're gonna fix and flip it or wholesale it or BRRRR, you might only need a year term. And so you can do a shorter amount. But on that situation, I would also try to see if you can put no money down, no payments until 1 year. And maybe you'll give them another 5 or 10K for waiting a year. Any other questions? Okay. So some other miscellaneous things. If you buy on a wrap mortgage, I would double insure yourself. So you're going to add the sellers as additionally insured on your insurance policy. And then the insurance policy the seller already had is still going to be in existence. You're still going to be paying on it. Because what you don't want to do is go cancel that insurance policy and have the bank be like, hey, what happened? Did you sell this house? Because the bank, if someone sells a house, they want that money back so they can lend it at a higher interest rate. So we don't want to be shouting from the rooftops to the bank about what's going on, because they could call their loan to be due on sale. And we don't want that, because then we've got to go refinance or sell or whatever. I will say Pace Morby has done hundreds of creative deals, probably like, I don't even know, literally hundreds. And I think he's had 2 instances of a due on sale clause. One, I believe he talked his way out of, he just renegotiated with the bank. Can't remember what happened to the other one. But he has a podcast with Bigger Pockets about that. It's actually a really great episode. I would definitely recommend listening to it. When it comes to paying the mortgage on a wrap, you are not going to pay the seller and hope that they pay the bank. You're going to pay the bank and know that you paid the bank and then make the payment to the seller. So in my situation where I had a 575 mortgage to the bank and then 150 to the seller, I don't pay her 725 and hope she pays 575 to the bank on time. I pay to the bank and then I make a second payment of 150 to her. And that's why I need her direct deposit info and her authorization, so that if I need to call the bank, I can talk to them on behalf of this loan. Another great thing to negotiate is a grace period on when your first payment is due. So maybe you could get them to say your first payment isn't due for 60 or 90 days. That could go a long way, especially if it's a high payment, in making sure you get your rent to own tenant, your long-term tenant, or whatever the heck you're doing with it in place before those payments start. And then due on sale. So there's 2 main things you can do to avoid this. One is you could get due on sale clause insurance. This company was created by Pace Morby, so keep that in mind. I would never pay for this unless you really can't sleep at night and this is what's going to make you sleep at night and the numbers still make sense. I have no clue how much this insurance is. It's probably expensive, but it's an option if it's between doing the deal and not being able to sleep at night. The other thing you can do is buy it in a trust, because the bank and everybody else for that matter cannot see who is in a trust. And people all the time, for estate planning or liability, asset protection reasons, move properties into trusts. It's very common. There are no red flags when that happens. So if you buy 123 Main Street in a trust called 123 Main Street Trust, the bank is not going to be alarmed, because they are going to think, oh, the seller just moved it into a trust for X, Y, and Z reason. But really, it got bought by you in a trust. And then if the bank ever were to really question it, what you could do is go add the seller to the trust to show the bank, hey, they still own it, no big deal, and then take them back out of the trust. Any questions there? With insurance, okay, so yeah, you definitely also always ask, is this 575 mortgage escrowed or not? Because there's a big difference. If it doesn't include the whole pity and if it does. So just make sure that you know what if the payment includes escrow or not. And then what will happen is upon the auto renew, a lot of them will, you'll just not renew. So it's less suspicious to not renew at the end of your term than to cut it in the middle of your insurance year. And just your new insurance will start to become will then go to your escrow, will go to the bank, and you'll start escrowing that new insurance. So basically, we're just not sounding any alarm bells until the insurance is up for renewal. And you just say, no, I found a better deal. This is the insurance we're using. And then upon that, you'll also have the sellers as additionally insured, just in case anything weird were to happen and there was any questions about it being sold on contract. The sellers are there on that insurance policy to just to be safe. Anything else? Okay, so just some other few creative things just to inspire you to think outside the box, no matter what it is that you're doing, is rent to own can also work as a plan B. Let's say you flip a house and you go over budget. I've talked about this with a few people. It's not going to work as a long-term rental because it's not going to cash flow. But if you rent to own it, maybe you can up that rental price because you're going to rent at a premium in exchange for your risk of taking on a rent to own tenant. And maybe now you can cash flow on this flip that you went over on. So that's a great second option. Or like me, maybe you find a good deal, but it's not a neighborhood you like. Well, you could rent to own it and only ever have to find one tenant. So you can be done with that neighborhood and not worry about vacancy and turnover. Another great thing about rent to own, like I told you, I said I'll sell it for $113 as is or $125 with everything cleared out and the walls painted. You could advertise, a handyman special. That's what I did. It's a handyman special at $113, or if you want it cleared up, I'll do $125. So this is somebody who was in my mentorship program along with me, another student. And so you can see she says 1 house, 2 ways to make it yours. You can do the remodel yourself, aka handyman special, or you can buy it at a higher price. You can pick out the paint colors and the cabinets and we'll do it, but you're going to pay more for it and rent is going to be more. So that allows people to pick what they want to do. And a lot of rent to own tenants actually tend to be contractors who are self-employed. Maybe they don't have the steady income. Maybe they're not great with their money, but they'll buy it cheaper and do the work themselves because that's what they do every day and they're good at it. And maybe they want the control to pick out what they want their home to look like. Another thing is maybe you wheel and deal with the junk that's left in the house. Maybe it's some old cars that you can use for scrap metal. So, you help the seller scrap them. The seller gets the money so that you can get a lower purchase price or whatever it is. Don't just get so stuck on purchase price. It's either as is or it's perfectly fixed up. There's so many phases in between that you can agree on. So just always be willing. I heard somebody on Instagram talking about how he got a deal done because he helped the seller sell one of his cars. Like that was part of the deal. Help me sell this car and you can get this house at this price. So he literally listed it for him, found the buyer, towed the truck for him, all of that good stuff just to get the deal done. Another thing is, like I said, I talked about a wholesale. Oh, maybe it was Pace, yes. Yeah. So maybe you're doing a wholesale. Well, if it only takes you a few days to clean up the property and mow the lawn and you're able to list it and get it sold in a couple months, if you get your grace period with the seller for 90 days, you could essentially get the house for no money down and no payments, and then get it bought out before you have to come up with any payments. Then the seller gets their initial sum, you get the difference, and then the end buyer gets, a new home. Obviously, this is a super ideal situation. This would be way harder to execute than it is to just talk about, but definitely another example of how to be creative. Lastly, you could wholesale a property, or maybe you're buying from a wholesale, but their wholesale fee just doesn't make sense, but you're really excited about the deal. You could wheel and deal and say, hey, you're asking for a 10K wholesale fee. I won't do that, but I will give you $1,000 a month for the next 10 months. You get your 10K, I get to do the deal. Maybe you get to use your cash flow from the property to pay out that wholesale fee, so you don't have to come up with 10K. And then the initial seller's pumped because their house got sold. So again, wheel and deal, think creatively, and you'll be able to do more deals. One thing I do is, I've had hoarder tenants who I've had to provide a dump trailer to and help them move their crap out. And that should not be my responsibility to clean up after somebody. But at the end of the day, if it's between that and being left with a rental that is floor to ceiling full of stuff, I'm willing to give and take to get them out and to get them to take everything with them. And in both instances, both hoarders took everything with them, and I was shocked. And all I had to do was say, hey, I'll give you this dump trailer, I'll haul it for you. And it ended up making a win-win. They would not have had the money to buy a dump trailer or a U-Haul. So they would have had to leave all their stuff, and then I would have been mad that I had to pay for it or do the work myself. So basically, final thoughts are just think creatively, think outside of the box. Like, you can, when it comes to creative financing, you can negotiate anything because there's no bank involved. There's no bank hoops to jump through. It's you and a seller or you and a buyer, and just really try to get to a conversation where you're both able to talk about what you truly need and how to get that done. Any other questions? I think we have another like 45 minutes, and I got through that pretty quick.
Great job, Grace.
Thank you.
Ma'am, does anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question right now, but I just think it was like very mind blowing right now, like because I've never heard of creative financing. So if anything, I was going to just ask like, where does this term creative financing like came from? Like, where did you even like, hear of it? Like, how did it started? Because this is my first time, hearing it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like you could do that. You could do this. You could do that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot.
I'll take this to start, Grace. So Valeska, when you open up and look at your listing agreement, what do you see?
When I open up my listing agreement,
When you pull up the Florida or NEFAR listing agreement, what are the check boxes you see in regards to financing?
seller financing is one of them for sure.
And that one is so heavily overlooked that I think it's just knowing really what that all entails. You know what I mean? Like what Grace said, it's like creative financing, and then there's just so many different terms underneath that. But you can go ahead, Grace.
No, 100%. People just don't understand it, so they don't utilize it. And in business, when it comes to businesses, like people who buy and sell businesses, people seller finance their businesses all the time because those types of people get it. They get how to do that, and it's not weird or crazy or rare. Like, most businesses are actually seller financed, just because people in that world get it. Most homeowners don't get it, and that's why you as an investor and you as a realtor need to learn it so that you can educate people and help people and get things done. But as far as where I learned it, I was in a mentorship specifically for creative financing. I just knew I wanted to do more deals and I was going to run out of my own money. So I did a 6-month mentorship with Jen and Joe Delafave. And learned a ton, and they've done a ton of creative financing. If you're interested, I would follow them on Instagram. And then I literally would learn one little thing and then I'd go try to do it and I'd be like, oh, well, that didn't work. What did I do wrong? And then I'd talk to them on my meetings and then they'd talk me through it and I'd go and do it again. It's like I talked to so many sellers before I was able to do a creative deal, like a lot. And you will too if you pursue this. It's not easy, but if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw it out there too, Velasquez. So when I first tried to do this, Grace was there to help me and I failed. And I think that was like earlier this year. And I really wanted that deal so bad. But then I was like, ugh, I was like, man, where did I mess up? But then when I did it recently, it worked. And I was like, well, damn, how did I mess up the first one? But now I see where I could have improved, because the main objective with creative financing is listening to the seller. And I was not really listening. I was so focused on getting or being a part of the deal that, I was not able to really like hear her, what her needs were to make sure I got the deal done. But I'm still following up with that seller. So to be continued on that one.
Good for you.
That's good. Yeah. So not to like sound dumb or anything, but okay, let's say since I would like to also invest, when I would negotiate or would talk to a seller, that would mean that me on my end, since I'm gonna, buy them, I would have to be financially like ready and go through, like, do you use a investment loan and stuff like that?
Yeah, if you're doing seller financing and you negotiate, just a few $1,000s down, the seller typically is not going to screen you. They don't know to screen you or ask for financial stuff. Like you just make the deal and maybe get it for a few grand, start making those payments. If I'm not using seller financing or creative financing, then yeah, I've used investment loans, I've used private money. I've never used hard money, but I've partnered to get deals done. I'm all over the place. I'll do whatever I need to do to get a deal done. But how about you, Yasha?
So I'm in the process of doing private money, but with that one particular deal with creative financing, I put down $8,000 and I paid the seller's closing costs and my closing costs in addition to inspection stuff, all of that. But all in all, I want to say it was in about like $11,400 something for the total. And if you think about it, like that's one commission check right there. And I was like, damn, I could have been doing this for a long time, because, when we get checks, we're like, okay, we don't think about like, where are we really putting this at, and taking that check, a commission check I just made and just putting it into like this, that's like a great, and then it's going to be making me money. You know what I mean? So it's making me money on my money better than
you bought cash flow.
Yep. So
yeah,
there's no dumb question.
That's a good question. Yeah, that was a good question.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's another one. Let me see. Oh, awesome.
I'm glad I heard. I'm mind blown as an inspiring realtor. Seriously, if you're a realtor and you can commit to learning this, and you don't have to know anything to start, like just have this recording. Like Yasha, she did not know creative. At one point, neither of us knew anything about creative financing, but we committed to figuring it out. You can set yourself so far apart and help so many more people, especially as the market is turning a little bit. And there are more people out there who maybe owe more than it's worth, or are stuck in a pickle in a bad situation. If you can figure out how to help them, you're going to be able to do so many more deals.
Yes, 1000%. Like even as an agent now, like I see so many people who have purchased homes over the last 2 years that, you know, probably overpaid and now they've lost their job, they're in forbearance or just can't afford it anymore. And
Mhm.
those are opportunities for you guys to pick up deals. And don't even think like, oh my God, I don't have the money to buy this deal. If you don't have the money, flip that deal to somebody else and charge a fee for it because it is off market. Like you can it's basically like a commission if you want to look at it like as a real estate
Mhm.
agent. Basically your commission and whatever that is, flip that deal to someone else. Or I think some people call it like deal to entry or something like entry fee. Is what I've seen. So I've even thought about it, like reaching out to other agents where you're asking them about like their off-market listings, because, you know, we're getting a lot of listings right now. So
Mhm.
asking those agents who, you know, who do a lot of business, what they have coming up, because they might have one that might need some work or something where they just need to go. And so that's an
Mhm.
opportunity for you to pick it up or sell it to someone else, especially if there's no listing agreement signed.
Yep. And if you tell people, hey, what deals are coming your way that have little to no equity? Because I can get them sold. Alaska, did you have another question?
No, I'm taking it all in. Yeah, like
Good.
taking it all in.
It's
But
so
thank
fun.
you. Everything has been very, very like informative. It's definitely what you said. It's like one of those things where you're like, wait, huh? And then like, oh, okay. But you know, you have to like
Mhm.
refresh your memory and kind of go over it again and be like, oh, okay. I'll probably have more of those moments. Like, I get it now.
Yeah,
I literally talked
exactly.
to Grace like 5 times before I did my first deal, or like in the middle of doing it. Cause like after I met with her again, when I found a deal, I had to still call her like 4 more times. To like walk me through and just make sure. Cause like I would have more questions or other stuff was coming up. And so, you know, that's also something just to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Like, it's one of those things that the first time it's going to be confusing, but if you go and watch this video again, you'll get it a little bit more. And then like by the third time you watch it or talk about it or hear about it, you're gonna be like, oh, I get it. And it's okay if you don't get it 100% right now. You're like, I kind of get it, but it's not quite clicking. That's okay. It didn't click for me the first time I heard it, the first time I learned about it. It took a while, and that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Does anyone
Yeah.
else have any more questions? I know we have a new agent on here, Paula. I see Taylor. I think
I would say, Grace, what would you say has been probably like the most challenging in all these processes that you've probably seen?
Yeah. I would say the most challenging part is definitely rejection. Everybody wants to sell their house for full price right now. You know, no contingencies, 15-day close. But you have to go through that rejection to find those people who need you. And there are people who need you and need you to come up with this offer. One of the gals at our retreat was talking about how in 2008 she had to sell her house for a loss, a big loss too, because she didn't know about creative financing. And if she could have had an investor show up at her door and say, hey, I'll take over your loan, you're not going to get anything, but you're not going to lose money. She would have been like, absolutely, let's do this deal yesterday. And then the other hard thing is just you do probably have to do a little bit of educating, whether it's your attorney, your closing agent, the buyer, the seller, whoever. But just remember, you don't need to educate them on real estate investing. You just need to tell them enough about how the deal's going to go to get them to sign on. You don't need to educate them on cash flow and the closing process and all this stuff. So keep it simple when you can, but be persistent, I would say.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll even share like my first time doing it, or talking to someone about it. I feel like I probably over explained myself, and I was like, and then at the time too, like not sounding so sure or like knowing what I was talking about, that also probably was, why I also lost that opportunity, because I just didn't know enough information, or I wasn't confident in what I knew.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
the more you do it, the more reps you put in, just like anything, the better you'll get at it. Cause now I feel like, oh, I'm a freaking pro, even though I've only done one. But also in hindsight, like if you ever do deals that like real estate transactions with seller financing, like those count too, because I
Mhm.
didn't realize I was doing seller financing since 2016 with a buyer on all of their acquisitions for land. And I was like, oh shit, like this is real. I was doing this. I just didn't know that there were other parts to this outside of
Yep.
like that, So and I was like, oh, they only do this on land. So I didn't really know. So this
Yeah.
is
Absolutely. And if you don't ever be afraid to say, hey, seller, I don't know the answer to that question, but let me triple check so that I don't tell you the wrong thing. And then come back and ask somebody who knows, or Google it, look into it and figure it out, because you don't need to know everything, but you need to be confident. And part of confidence is admitting when you're not 100% sure. So let me get back to you so that I make sure I tell you the right thing. And then, yeah, don't over explain, be confident, but not pushy. And one thing I forgot to add to this contact page is I do have like 45-minute coaching calls that you can book with me if you have a deal that you're like, how do I put this together? What do I say to the seller? How does this work? And we can talk about it. And then you can go talk to the seller and then come back and we can talk some more, and back and forth until you get the deal done. But I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. Very.
Yeah. Also, here are some ways to get a hold of me if you want. I also have my Google page link at the bottom. If you want to leave a 5-star review, you don't have to say anything, literally just a 5-star review. I'll give it $20 to one of you. I'll pick a winner. And yeah, if you feel free to message me, if anything's a quick answer, you can DM me or email me and I'll try to get back to you. But I would say if you have something more in depth you want to talk about, you can go to my Instagram page and I do have calls that you can book with me. And hopefully you'll have this recording.
Yes. Yep. I'll send it out to the people. I also just want to add, I am also a member of Grace's and Amelia's WIIRE community. And that's a really great place to keep continuing this conversation along with InvestHER. But just, like she mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that, they do retreats, they have monthly masterminds also, and then they have a podcast, but just a great community too, to get plugged into and connected to, because you can never have enough. And I know I'm literally addicted to real estate investing now. So we all know how bad my addictions are. I dive so deep down the rabbit hole, but just a great way to keep the momentum going and just to stay around other women doing what you want to be doing, and that can add value to you too. So just want to throw that.
Yeah, thanks for that shout out.
Yes. So does anyone else have any last minute questions before we let Grace go for today? All right. Well, you'll be paying for that 45-minute call then. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, Grace, for your time today. I know we planned this out well in advance, but thank you so much. I really appreciate your information, your knowledge, just your willingness to share. So thank you for doing this for us today. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And thanks to everybody for coming. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day and get some creative deals done.
Yes. All right. Bye, you guys.
Thank you.